It's make or break time for you in your fantasy football season. Your drafts are coming up. You want to smack your friends around. Well, you're in the right place. Because beautiful people, welcome in. Today we're breaking down the 10 must-have breakout players that you should be drafting. These are the guys that are going to propel your team forward ahead of your little friends that think they can compete with you. Now, maybe some of you actually have some big friends. Either way, big friends, right? Either way, you know the guy I'm talking about in your league. Either way, those guys are going to have no chance of competing with you after watching this video. We're starting with Jaylen Warren right here. It's hard not to like this player this season. We discussed him all spring. We discussed him at the start of summer, and we're deep in summer, 100 degrees here in Texas. I'm sweating as I record this indoors with AC, and he's still a good pick. Because the fella goes right now 83rd overall. This guy's going in the 8th, 9th round sometimes of fantasy drafts, and it's just surprising to me because we just saw him shine last year in year 2 as a backup. I'm thoroughly impressed by Jaylen Warren, right? Beautiful man, beautiful hair. You see right here. All right, pause with the, oh, he called him a beautiful man. Pause, right? He's a good-looking man. We can say he's a good-looking man. All right, here we go. Look at this right here. This guy put up nearly over 1,100, nearly 1,200 total yards as a backup running back. Let me say that again. A backup running back who didn't even play 50% of the snaps last year. That's how efficient, that's how productive he was. And this guy had 2 different play callers last year. The Steelers fired Matt Canada during the season, and both guys were giving Warren significant touches. Warren ranked 7th in yards per touch last season and led the entire NFL in broken tackle rate and was 3rd in explosive run rate. And the fella ended up being a top 30 running back despite only scoring 4 rushing touchdowns. And these 4 rushing touchdowns are likely to go up this year because now he has a new offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith who wants to run the ball at a pretty high rate. And just naturally that number's gonna rise because he had 200 touches. If he has 200 or more touches this year, he's gonna see somewhere between 6 touchdowns or more. Now, I touched on Arthur Smith. That's just one piece as to why I like this offense and overall situation for Jaylen Warren. Also the offensive line. Already a top half of the league offensive line last year. They've improved a ton the last few seasons. And then they add first round pick Troy Fautanu, second round pick Zach Frazier, 4th round pick Mason McCormick. So they're improving their offensive line. They have a great second year blocking tight end in Darnell Washington out of Georgia. And this team, led by Arthur Smith now as the offensive coordinator, is going to be built to run the ball, and they have the big men up front to do it. And now Arthur Smith specifically, a lot of people, including yourself, fantasy football players, just don't really like him because he didn't use his players right. But this is a guy that had top 10 offenses the last 2 years with the Titans, including the running game. And then you go back during his time, or 4 years ago with the Titans, and you look at the last 2 years with the Falcons, even though he didn't use Bijan as people would have liked last year, still top 10 run offenses. And the fella has already been on record. You can see the Coach Speak Index, a great account to follow on Twitter. He was on record earlier this offseason right here, and he says 1,100 plays we're going to run this year, 550 of them are going to be carries. 550, so 50% run rate. A 50% run rate is what would have led the NFL last year, 50% of the time. That's what the Steelers were running at last year. Now they have a more creative offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith when it comes to the run game and a better offensive line. So to recap here for Jaylen Warren, he gets an improved offensive line, a run-first coach, and he is a talented player entering the prime of his career at 25 years old. And just to see how good the Steelers offensive line is, like 3 years ago it was one of the worst in the league. Last year became a top half of the league offensive line, and now PFF has the Steelers unit ranked top 10, 9th overall, entering the NFL on paper for week 1 of the season. That's only going to help this backfield. It's only going to help a guy in Jaylen Warren, who, if I look at my fantasy blueprint right now, you can see I have Warren ranked as my 71st overall player right here. He goes 87th in drafts. I'm 16 spots ahead of the market, meaning over a round ahead of the market on a guy that was top 12 in running back receptions last year and now should only see more carries this year. I think this fella is an absolute steal in round 8 of drafts. He's my favorite breakout running back on the year. And now let's stick with the running back position as we get into the second guy I want to talk about, because every single day in camp right now, the reports you're seeing out of camp for this guy, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals, 24-year-old second-year player out of Illinois, the college there in the Big Ten. Yeah, everything's looking good for Chase Brown. Now, you might be saying, what do you mean, Sal? I saw this tweet come out from Underdog or another account saying Zach Moss is listed as the starter on the running back depth chart. Ignore this. The coaches do not make up the depth charts. They are on record literally saying we just have to put one out. Usually they let the marketing department, the PR team, just put one out for that case. Day by day, the battles are being won in camp. Not on a depth chart that's being put out in early August by a PR department. Potentially an intern is like the running joke in the fantasy space. I don't care about this right here. Zach Moss being the starting running back on August whatever, right, when he's not even getting put on this list by the head coach. So basically it means nothing to me. And we already know that Chase Brown is a younger, and let's go back to that page on Player Profiler. We already know that Chase Brown is a younger, more dynamic, better pass catcher than Zach Moss. So what is really the difference here between Zach Moss and Chase Brown? Well, Zach Moss is a veteran that they might trust more in pass protection to protect Joe Burrow, who's been hurt virtually every season of his career. So the biggest unlock for Chase Brown would be able to become a better pass protector, right? Blocking in third down situations against the blitz on early downs, these types of spots. Well, luckily we've got some recent news out of camp. His own head coach, Zach Taylor, went on the Coach Speak Index. They pulled a clip right here. He said, what's standing out about Chase Brown? Consistency. We love to see that. And this is the big spot right here. He's really getting a bunch of reps, and I like how consistent and dependable he's been. He's specifically talking about pass protection here. This is what I care much more about. What his head coach is saying about him. Not what a PR team is putting out there as the unofficial depth chart. They're called unofficial depth charts for a reason, and I also care about the reps that are actually happening in camp because Chase Brown is seeing a lot more RB1 reps in camp. He had 6 out of the 10 RB1 reps ahead of Zach Moss. Zach Moss only had 3 in this joint practice. So this is the situation I'm talking about. Let's read between the lines. Let's follow the camp reports. Chase Brown goes in round 10 of fantasy drafts right now and has the complete unlock in this offense to pop off to be a breakout. And if you're not familiar with his game, this guy has the size. He's about 210 pounds now. He came out with very good athletic testings. 4.43 at that speed, or at that size, about 90th percentile. Has great burst. That's kind of what he's known for, his explosiveness. Good strength, 87th percentile. And if we scroll down to what this guy did in college, some people say, oh, he can't be a workhorse back. He can't be trusted. What are those people talking about? Let's pull this up right here. In his final year of college, 328 carries, over 1,600 rushing yards, added some receptions, and then you factor in that he had 7 games of 30 carries or more. This guy can be a workhorse. Then he entered the NFL in his rookie year, and he was not in the best spot behind Joe Mixon, so only played 12% of the snaps, had a very limited sample of 44 carries, wasn't all that efficient on those, was very efficient on his 15 targets, but again, we can't really make much of this when the guy had like 50 total touches as a rookie, as an RB2, in a situation where during a lot of those weeks, Joe Burrow was either injured or just not even out there. So I'm a fan of Chase Brown this year. The one concern would be the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. PFF has them 21st overall, but they're actually a better run blocking unit. They have Amarius Mims, who they ended up drafting in the first round, maybe the best run blocking offensive lineman in the entire draft. They also signed Trent Brown in free agency, which should only help. They're kind of loaded at the tackle position right now. Have to see what they can do at the guard position. So I think they're probably a top half of the league run blocking unit, so I feel a little bit more comfortable with that for Chase Brown. All right, now let's talk about a wide receiver here who can break out, and it's Curtis Samuel. It might seem strange, the Buffalo Bills' new wide receiver, because it seems odd to say, oh, a 28-year-old is going to break out. Well, let me get into it with Samuel, because this is a guy who's now reunited with his former coach, Joe Brady. And back in 2020, Samuel put up season high numbers, or career high, 77 catches, 851 receiving yards. He added something like 30 to 40 carries on the ground as well, so a lot of rushing upside with Joe Brady, and that's apparently the role that he's seeing right now in camp, a slot receiver, potential number 1, and some rushing upside. And you can see right here, 32 beat writers just kind of sums that up, that he was a top 25 fantasy finisher that year with Joe Brady, the last time that he had him in 2020, but right now he's going as the 40th wide receiver or later in drafts, even though the Buffalo Bills don't have a number 1 receiver. Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis are gone. Over 240 targets are up for grabs there, and the competition is not all that tough. Here is that specific competition. You have a second-year player, Keon Coleman, who I actually like. I think he has some upside. I think he's a little bit raw, but based on the offense that he landed in with the quarterback in Josh Allen and the offensive coordinator, I think it could be interesting for him. I wasn't the biggest fan of him as a prospect, but the landing spot was good. Khalil Shakur, I think, is going to be mostly a slot player here. He's entering his 4th year with the team. He's been a talented player as well, so I think Khalil Shakur is an okay option, but nowhere near as battle-tested and proven as Curtis Samuel, who along 3 different stops has shown that when he's actually out there and healthy, he can be productive. Or 2 stops, this will be his 3rd stop. Now, specifically to touch on Keon Coleman, probably the biggest competition. The team has said they're going to lean on him to be a number 1 receiver. He's had kind of an up and down camp. He's battled some injuries in camp as well and OTAs. This is a guy who was a contested catch guy in college, and the problem with him was his separation. How often could he separate in college? And if he's going to be put on the outside in the NFL against some solid secondaries, he's going to have to face the Jets twice a year, right? These types of secondaries. That's going to be a little bit of an issue for me. You might have a little bit of a learning curve. I think he'll come on later in the year, but to start the year might be a little bit slower. And you can kind of see that being discussed right here. If you were to go ahead on the Coach Speak Index on Twitter and just type in Keon Coleman's name, you can see some of the stuff that his own head coach, Sean McDermott, is saying. He's an extremely raw rookie. These are not the things that you want to be hearing. We've heard similar things about maybe like a Brian Thomas Jr. They're saying he's a raw player. This just means that, again, he's a rookie. He's entering the NFL. He's a young player. Of course, he's getting thrown into this like number 1 receiver potential role right away. He's going to be a little bit raw transitioning to the NFL, but Curtis Samuel won't be. He's a stud. He's been in the NFL for 5-6 years. So with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis's 240 targets up for grabs, of course, Coleman will see some. Shakur, the tight end Dalton Kincaid, but I think Curtis Samuel can sneakily lead this team in targets. Now, before we get into the next wide receiver who is just absolutely going to break out this year, I think he has potential to be a top 10 wide receiver, and he's going like round 7 or 8. I want to let you know about the Fantasy Blueprint. Now, over 12,000 people, close to 13,000 people are using it, have used it this year to win their leagues. The simple question, do you want to win your league? Well, click this button. There'll be a link in the description below, and here's the deal. You can sign up for the same tools that I used for my draft, and every week during the season, the risk-free blueprint that over 12,000 people are using. It's risk-free this year if you sign up through one of our 2 partners below. Again, that'll be linked below, and it'll have all the instructions you need to follow. And what does risk-free means? It means if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I refund the one-time payment of just $10. $10 for the entire year, not only for your fantasy draft, but every week of the season to your fantasy championship, I'll be sending you tools, waiver wires, projections, tiers, rankings, matchups, all this stuff and more. So just click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen to get access to my fantasy blueprint right now. right now, since 12,000 plus people have access, your league mates probably do. So you probably just need it to even stick up or keep up with them at this point. But of course, the goal is to get you to smack around your league mates and win. So that's what we're going to do for you. Now, here's the next player I want to talk about. Christian Watson, who absolutely has been cooking Jair Alexander in camp. And this was their family night. He has this big catch down the sideline. It's just one catch, right? You can see here on Twitter, Kirk Benkert, the former Packers quarterback, is saying things like, if he's actually healthy this year, if this is the Christian Watson the Packers are getting this year, good luck in the league. And obviously, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a little bit of an overreaction. But it is a point to be made that Christian Watson is underrated this year. And outside of an injury that seems to be cured, his hamstring, if that's going to be good to go, he is a stud alpha receiver, in my opinion. And he's a stud alpha receiver who goes outside the top 100 picks. And I know what a lot of people are thinking. Oh, the narrative is the Packers have so many good young wide receivers. Jaden Reed, he was a great second-round pick last year. Dontavian Wicks in the 6th round or 5th round started coming on. Romeo Doubs has been stable as just like a third-year player. Christian Watson, he's got to compete with all these guys. Yeah, all that's true. I get that. But based on that inter-squad scrimmage, their family night, the offense went out there for 26 snaps. Christian Watson was a clear starter with Romeo Doubs, which we've been saying all offseason. Jaden Reed is not a starting receiver on this team. He's a starting slot receiver, but not in 2 wide receiver sets. And then you had Dontavian Wicks, just 6 snaps. So it is right now, Wicks is not a concern. Maybe he comes on later in the season. He was a talented player last year. He's definitely going to be involved. But maybe he comes on later in the season. It's Doubs and Watson on the outside unless they lose that role or get injured. And over the past 2 seasons, when Watson is actually out there and healthy and on the field, he is leading the Packers in first read target share. And that's with 2 different quarterbacks. So he's proving that he can get open no matter who his quarterback is. And Jacob Gibbs posts even more stats on these 2 years when Watson is out there and healthy and on the field. He ranks 3rd in red zone target share in the NFL when he's out there. 1st in end zone target share, meaning the targets that are actually in the end zone, not just the red zone. 7th in air yards, 18th in overall target share. I mean, these are borderline top 10 wide receiver numbers for a guy going outside the top 100 receivers in fantasy drafts. And just as a reminder, he is as unique of a player as they come. He has 4.3 speed, elite burst, as you can see right here, 94th percentile burst. And that 4.3 speed is very impressive because he's 6'4", 210 pounds. Again, the hamstrings were the issue last year, but reportedly he has cured those. He's found a way to identify that his left hamstring was weaker than his right one. And now that asymmetry, big technical terms, but the difference in that is not there anymore. So now they're the same strength. So there shouldn't be these constant pulls that have him out 4 to 6 weeks. And the confusing part for me is Jordan Love, we saw during the second half of last season, albeit a small sample, but he was extremely good those final 8 to 10 games of the year, including the postseason. That was the big question last year for Christian Watson. He was a 4th round fantasy pick, and we didn't even know if his quarterback was good. But now we know Jordan Love is a good quarterback, and now Christian Watson goes picks later because people are scared about a 6th round pick, Dontavian Wicks, who again, I think is talented. I like him, but as of right now, is not a starting receiver on this team. You know it's the fantasy season when I'm getting all fired up and just screaming to a camera. I mean, that is psychopath behavior. My girlfriend's in the other room, probably hearing me talk about this right now and is like, what the hell is wrong with that? We're having some fun. All right, the next player I want to talk about, and I'll try and cool down. Unless you want me to pipe up, let me know in the comments. I'll keep the pipe up. Here we go. Pause. Brian Robinson Jr. Look, I'm not sure who needs to hear this, but Brian Robinson Jr. of the Washington Commanders is their starting running back right now. It is not the newly signed Austin Eckler, who's been a big name for us, and we like him, and he's like in the fantasy community, and he's probably a great guy, but it's not him if we're talking fantasy football. It's not the 29-year-old back coming off of one of his worst seasons of his career, who has been on record himself saying he didn't want to re-sign with the Chargers because they wanted him to see a larger workload. He doesn't want to have that. He wants to stay healthy with a smaller workload. So why would people think that he's ahead of Brian Robinson here? All the reports right now are stating that Eckler seems to be a change of pace back, and Brian Robinson honestly is looking really good in camp. Brian Robinson prayed for Washington to get Jayden Daniels. Okay, we don't really care about that, but here's the big thing. Dan Quinn, his head coach, told me he's been blown away by Brian Robinson's ability to run a full route tree. This is something we saw last year to Brian Robinson. He was top 5 in running back receiving efficiency. It was a somewhat limited sample of like 35 receptions, but he was a quality pass catcher in college, and that showed up last year even more. And now I'm not really sure how much that's going to benefit Robinson as a pass catcher because he has a mobile quarterback, but we know for sure it's not going to benefit Austin Eckler, who wasn't efficient all that much last year, averaging just 3.5 yards per carry, only had 51 receptions, and now Jayden Daniels is there. I wouldn't be shocked if this number drops into the 40s this year, even lower if he's actually this change of pace back that's only seeing, 35-40% of the snaps. I think it's wheels up for Brian Robinson as a full potential workhorse back. And this situation kind of reminds me a little bit of what we were talking about with Jaylen Warren, because last year Brian Robinson only played 51% of the snaps. So it was like somewhat of this part-time role. Antonio Gibson was there, and despite that, this guy still goes out there and puts up 1,100 total yards flat. 1,100 total yards. He was a borderline, I believe he actually ended up cracking, right? If I'm saying, top 24 running back last year as a 50% backfield guy. I think he can see 60 to 60+% this year. Robinson was efficient, averaging 5.1 yards per touch, and was top 5 in running back receiving efficiency. Look, the dude broke tackles at an above average rate, and now he has a mobile quarterback in Jayden Daniels, which should only add some deception to the linebackers who have to decide is he handing it off or not, which gives Brian Robinson an extra step on those guys. Now, my biggest and baddest concern is the offensive line here. I don't think it's good. It wasn't really good last year, right? They have Sam Cosmi. Sam Cosmi is definitely good as long as he stays healthy. They added Tyler Bidaas, who I do think is a center. He's probably a talented player to be adding. So if these two pieces can stay good, and if they can get anything out of a guy like Cornelius Lucas or Nick Allegretti, some of these guys that they signed, if they get anything out of those guys, if they can just be average, it should be a borderline average offensive line, which is all we need here. But if those guys aren't good, if Tyler Bidaas doesn't come through, if Sam Cosmi misses some time, it's concerning. So you have to keep that in mind. The offensive line is concerning. Now, the next man up is a rookie running back, Jonathan Brooks, and people, I know what you're going to be saying. Oh my God, Sal, he might miss 3 or 4 weeks. Oh my God. We've already been saying that. We've already been saying he might be ramped up 3 or 4 weeks. Now that the coach came out and said, yeah, we might put him on the PUP, or you know what, probably only 2 or 3 weeks. Now people are getting concerned. Well, I'm actually not concerned. If anything, this is going to make his ADP drop. Look, this is what his head coach came out and clarified after all those reports of him maybe missing 3 or 4 weeks. He's not going to play in the preseason. Then they asked, okay, is he going to go on the PUP list? You can see right here. He said, there is a chance. There's a chance. So again, we just have to take it week by week and really trust the information we're getting from our trainers. And then Canellis went on to add that ideally we get him back by week 2 or week 3, which would mean he would miss the PUP list. But either way, this channel here has been saying all off season, it's probably going to take a month for him to ramp up, similar to Breece Hall last year. And then Breece Hall was a top 5 running back in fantasy. So now we're getting more value, in my opinion, as Brooks will fall from like an 8th or a 9th round pick to maybe even round 10 or later. And in my opinion, let me lay the groundwork for you as to why this is the workhorse that you want to be targeting late in drafts. This was a player who last year in college, when he actually got to start finally because Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson were gone, he puts up over 1,100 rushing yards. He puts up over almost 300 receiving yards. He was averaging over 140 yards per game. But check this out right here. If we look at his game logs from last year, averaging 140 yards per game, despite his first 2 games of the season having just 52 and 57 rushing yards. If you take out those first 2 games of the season, this guy was averaging over 160 total yards per game last year and can do it all. I'm talking he has the size, that's 216 pounds. He has the speed. He has the ability to pass protect, catch passes. What else? Run between the tackles. He has the ability to do all these things. A complete back. And he does it better than guys like Chuba Hubbard in the backfield, who's talented, but not as well-rounded, and definitely better than Miles Sanders. Now, the big concern and why he's going on the PUP list is he tore his ACL late in the season, and people are saying, okay, well, 9 months exactly would be August. He should have been back by now. He might miss a couple weeks. Here's what Edwin Porras, who is, I believe, a doctor on Twitter, ends up saying, or maybe a physical therapist. You can see right here, and Todd Gurley in 2015 had ACL surgery around the same time, ended up finishing as the RB8. He missed a couple of games. Last year, in a much worse offense with a worse offensive line, Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard combined last year for 16.2 fantasy points, which was a top 10 running back performance. Now, again, that was because the offensive line stunk. They had to run the ball a lot more, but now it's an improved offensive line, an improved offense, and Jonathan Brooks, even if he comes back midway through September, still has 12 plus weeks to be fantasy valuable for you in like the 10th round of drafts. And just as a reminder, this was a guy that they traded up for. They traded up. They gave up not only their 2nd round pick to swap right here and take him in the 2nd round out of Texas, but 2 5th round picks as well. And this offensive line is improved. It's the 2nd most improved offensive line according to PFF, behind only the Jets. They were the dead last offensive line last year. Now they're ranked 20th coming into the season. They signed some pretty veteran, some pretty big pieces, veteran guards. They give big contracts to Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt. So this should help the offensive line. It should help the overall team environment for an offense that has a new head coach in Dave Canales, who last year fed Rachaad White 330 plus touches, the 2nd most touches in the NFL. Dave Canales wants a workhorse back, and that's exactly what Jonathan Brooks profiles out as. Now the next man up, we're going to another rookie, and a 1st round rookie that also got traded up for by the Kansas City Chiefs, and Xavier Worthy, who goes as the 3rd Chiefs wide receiver off the board in drafts right now, which is kind of crazy to me. Just barely inside the top 100. He's going in like round 8, round 9 of drafts, after Marquise Brown, after Rashee Rice. And in my opinion, that's a mistake because, hello, he's playing with Patrick Mahomes. Hello, he's playing in an offense that Patrick Mahomes last year in this same Chiefs offense saw career lows in his air yards per attempt. Look at this right here. Just 6.6 air yards per attempt. 18th in the NFL, by far the lowest in his career. Why did this happen, you might be saying, Sal? Well, MVS wasn't reliable. Justin Watson wasn't reliable or getting open downfield. The team had to use the short passing game, a la Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, because they had no downfield weapons. But just like this team always does, the Kansas City Chiefs, under this general manager and organization, they fixed their flaws. They did it a couple years back when they lost in the Super Bowl to the Bucs and their offensive line fell apart. Since then, they've had a top 10 offensive line, including this year. They're going to have another one every single season. So what they do when they couldn't throw downfield last year, they go out, they sign Marquise Brown to a 1-year deal. They trade up for Xavier Worthy, who we're talking about in the draft. And just like that, they have 2 weapons who in their entire career, not only in college, but the NFL for Marquise Brown, have been known to win in the short parts of the field, sure, intermediate, and definitely deep. And all the talk out of camp right now is how the Chiefs are looking like they're going to be returning to that downfield weapon team like they had with Tyreek Hill. Look, Patrick Mahomes throws it deep to wide receiver Xavier Worthy for a touchdown, throws it deep to Marquise Brown for a touchdown, throws it deep to McCole Hardman for a deep downfield touchdown. We're getting a lot of hype that they're going to be throwing it downfield more. It makes sense. They have the personnel. That's what they've stated they want it to do, and that's what the offense is looking like it's doing in camp right now. Now, as we do dive deeper into Xavier Worthy and his competition, we do have to point out what happened to Marquise Hollywood Brown this past weekend. Marquise Brown, after just one snap, ends up leaving the game. He injured his clavicle joint dislocation. It was an injury that is going to take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, is what doctors on Twitter were immediately saying, but then we got some nice clarity right after this. Because it appears the exact same injury happened to Tyreek Hill back in the past, and Hill was out for 4 weeks. 4 weeks, okay, well, there's a nice thing here by Harold Kuntz done on Twitter. You have 26 days from now as the Chiefs' #1 game, or their first game of the season, week 1. So there is some uncertainty around Marquise Hollywood Brown playing in week 1. That'll be a close call. Maybe they hold him out to be safe, but he's probably going to be playing in week 2 or week 3. So this isn't going to impact things too much here. And you can see Hayden Winks right here on Twitter basically points out and talks about what Ian Rappaport was talking about. He avoided Marquise Brown, the worst case scenario, and is going to be back at some point in September. September, the first week of the season, is like what, September 8th or 9th, somewhere around there. So even if he misses a week, we're going to think he comes back week 2. So again, it's not the biggest thing here, but if anything, this does help Xavier Worthy get even more starter snaps in 2 wide receiver sets, be leaned on more with Patrick Mahomes during these next 2, 3, 4 weeks while Marquise Brown is not with the team at all on the field. And it's really hard not to like Xavier Worthy when he set the record for 4.21 speed, obviously the fastest of all time at the NFL Combine. But not only that, this is a guy that if you scroll down to his college career was productive every year. He's not a John Ross who had like one good year and had a really fast combine time and then he ended up being a bust for the Bengals. No, this is a guy who right away as an 18-year-old earned 30% of the targets at Texas. As a second-year player, 29%. Last year, battling with 2 NFL players now in Adonai Mitchell, who was a second-round pick, and Jatavion Sanders, a 4th-round pick for the Carolina Panthers tight end. He still earned a 25% target share and career high over 1,000 yards. And this was all with Quinn Ewers last year, who some people like, some people don't. The college quarterback for Texas, he was able to produce at a high level, Xavier Worthy. And I get a little giddy thinking about Andy Reid looking at Xavier Worthy and saying, holy shit, we can give him some of those Tyreek Hill play calls, those long developing routes over the middle of the field where he gets to win with his speed. I think we're going to see some of those. And like I mentioned earlier, the offensive line is going to be good once again. It's going to be a top 10 unit. It's going to be led by Joe Thuney, who might be the best pass protector. You can see right here, best pass blocking guard in the NFL, as you can see based on PFF. They still have Creed Humphrey, who's an absolutely great center. So you have these pieces that should give Patrick Mahomes time to throw downfield with more reliable receivers now, and Xavier Worthy, I think, is going to benefit from that. Now, before we get into these next 3 players and this next quarterback, I mean, he's going to break fantasy, in my opinion. I think he's just going to break fantasy. Over 60% of you aren't subscribed to the channel. My goal by September 1st, or at least the first game, September 5th, whatever it is to get that closer to 50%. Look, it helps a lot. A lot of people just don't remember to subscribe. If you hit the subscribe button, it goes a long way in helping this channel just reach more people and lets me put out more content. Now, that player who's going to break fantasy is pretty simple for me. It's Anthony Richardson, who had season-ending shoulder surgery last year. But this guy out there, when he was actually out there for those 4 or 5 games, he only had 4 games played. 2 of them were completed. He finished as the quarterback 4 and the quarterback 2, according to Player Profiler. And in a game where he left after the first quarter, he put up 17.7 fantasy points in 1 quarter because he scored 2 times on the ground. And that's the big thing here. This dude is an absolute cheat code because of his rushing upside. But not only his rushing upside paired with the fact that he's like LeBron James athleticism. Because just a little reminder, this guy came out and ran a 4.43 40 time. 4.43 40 time. Okay, that's fine. That's cool. That's really fast. At 244 pounds at the NFL Combine. Again, when I say he's LeBron James level, plus he has the gifted rushing upside, it's true. And in his first 3 games last year, he averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game as a runner alone, not even factoring in his passing. And I thought that this quote was pretty impressive from an Albert Breer post he had in here. He said, Anthony Richardson's progression has been pretty significant on the mental side, which is what you hope for. Now, some people might see this and say, oh, you guys are calling Anthony Richardson dumb. How dare you? They might get into even more deeper reasoning as to why, right? They might unravel a bunch of worms. No, the point is he had unravel a bunch of worms. What does that mean? He had 12 career starts in college, or 14, something like that. He was just inexperienced. He came to the NFL inexperienced, and now he has a full off season to actually learn the offense even more, which I think is great and should just only unlock his ability as a thrower and even his accuracy more with his big arm. And when you have a second-year coach now in Shane Steichen, who was great last year, almost took a team led by Gardner Minshew that didn't have Jonathan Taylor for the first quarter of the season or first 4 games. He almost took that team to the playoffs. They were 1 drop pass away in week 17 against the Texans. And it's going to help Anthony Richardson, assuming that he just stays healthy and doesn't get injured again, that he has a top 3 offensive line. A line that used to be great, kind of fell back the last few years. Last year got back into form. Top 3 offensive line is obviously going to be fantastic. You look at what Shane Steichen said. They asked him since he was injured last year, concussion, the shoulder surgery, are you going to stop letting him limit his running? Right here, you can see. And he says shoot. Are you going to limit Steph Curry from shooting three-pointers? Well, that's one of Anthony's strengths, so we're not going to get away from that. That's what he does well. So basically, it's good to see that Shane Steichen says, I have this LeBron James freak at the quarterback position. Yeah, he got hurt last year. We'll be a little bit smarter with that, but we're going to design some plays still for this guy to use his best skill set. And he has a good supporting cast entering year 2. Now, Josh Downs was recently hurt in camp. By the time that this comes out, I'm recording it a couple of days in advance due to some travel. We'll see what happens with Josh Downs. Hopefully, fingers crossed that he's good, but Michael Pittman's been as reliable as they come in terms of playing and earning targets. And then the wide receiver 3 job, which could become the wide receiver 2 job, depending on Downs' status, becomes Alec Pierce and a new second-round exciting player, 4.3 speed, Adonai Mitchell, who I think has a ton of upside, especially pairing well with the big arm, right? Muscles, hey, of one Anthony Richardson. I'm having too much fun right now. Somebody has to calm me down. Okay, let's get into this next wide receiver room, some rookie receivers who are absolutely about to break out. And I want to talk about the Patriots' young guns right here, mostly Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. Javon Baker, a 4th-round pick, and Jalen Polk, because every single day in camp right now, these guys are just getting tons of praise, and everything coming out about them is like, yep, these are the guys that you want to be targeting. And I will admit that a lot of it is coming from the Jalen Polk side. Early on, he seems to have earned the trust of the coaching staff. People are calling him one of the most reliable wide receivers out there. You can see, you could basically just type in Jalen Polk, 32 beat writers, and you can see every single day they've said something about him. Jalen Polk has been featured with the other regulars. Patriots offense as a reliable underneath target. He made a few downfield grabs as well. Strong hands. This is exactly what we thought of him coming out. We've been saying it. He's a reliable player. He has the best hands of any rookie, even the first-round picks, as this guy went in the second round in the entire draft. I think Jalen Polk is fantastic. And then you have the 4th-round pick, Javon Baker, who probably could have went in like the second round if it wasn't for some concerns that people had about him overall. He's a violent runner, the way that he runs routes and attacks the ball up high, more of that dynamic, explosive player downfield. And when you look at the overall Patriots wide receiver room, if we pull that up real quickly here, the overall Patriots wide receiver room, like Demarius Douglas is talented. If you want to take a shot on him too, that's fine. You're going to have Demarius Douglas out there. You're going to have Jalen Polk. You're going to have Javon Baker. But after that, okay, KJ Osborne and newcomers trying to make the team. Okay, Kayshon Boutte trying to make the team. Jalen Reagor. Juju Smith-Schuster apparently is not in the top 5 receivers. Kendrick Bourne's already injured in camp, coming off of a torn ACL. Like all of these things, or he's on the PUP list off of that torn ACL. All these things mean that these young guys in New England are going to have upside, and they go in like the 15th, 16th, 17th, 20th round of the draft, so if you're talking about Javon Baker. All right, now one final one for you here, and this is more of a fun one, but let me talk about Marvin Mims just for a second. As of right now, the reports out of camp are that he's definitely a top 4 receiver and probably a top 3 starting receiver alongside Courtland Sutton and newcomer Josh Reynolds on this team. And if you are forgetting a little bit, this is a guy who last year was a rookie, a 2nd-round pick. He has 4.3 speed. He was the youngest or 2nd youngest wide receiver, I believe the youngest wide receiver in the NFL draft, still just 22 years old. And this was the first draft pick in round 2, the first draft pick of Sean Payton being a Denver Broncos coach, and they traded up for him. So he kind of handpicked this guy as his first investment as a new coach with the Broncos last year. But there's no doubt about it that he landed in a crappy landing spot because Sutton and Jerry Jeudy were there on a team that just ran the ball a ton and only used 2 wide receivers often. But despite that, he was able to show that he is a playmaker because on his limited routes last year, he averaged 17.1 yards per catch, which was top 5 in the NFL. And now this year, Jerry Jeudy is gone, so yeah, he's going to have to compete with Sutton. And yeah, Josh Reynolds, who's a reliable player on the outside. But after that, Troy Franklin's having a bad camp. Apparently, Troy Franklin, their 4th-round pick, is even behind a later-round pick in Veli or Vili right now in the pecking order. And then after that, Tim Patrick off of back-to-back injuries, now 30-plus years old. Like, these are probably the pretty strong top 3 wide receivers here. And if you're getting Marvin Mims, a talented, fast player, explosive player on the field more, outside of Courtland Sutton, which I don't even know if he's as dynamic as Marvin Mims, you're not really talking about a lot of playmakers on this Broncos team. This is where the playmaking could come in from. Marvin Mims, wouldn't be shocked if he's the #1 receiver for this team. Yes, Bo Nix is there, but Bo Nix was efficient throwing downfield at Oregon. He just didn't do it a lot. But there's a chance you're getting a guy who has #1 receiver upside on his team as the 229th player in drafts. For many of you, that's going to mean he's not drafted. For many of you who play in deeper leagues, 16, 18, 20 rounds, it means he's going to go in like the 20th or 21st round of drafts. So this is like a really deep target for you guys who I think has a chance to break out. So these are the breakout players who are must-haves right now in drafts. But if you want to see, there's a lot of people drafting the wrong wide receivers and running backs right now, and you want to see the guys you should be taking instead, check out these videos. Where are they at? They're going to be popping up somewhere right over here, running backs, wide receivers. Check those out. They're going to help you prepare for your draft. And the goal is to, smack your friends around. That one kind of hurt. Smack your friends around a little bit. Enjoy those videos. I'll see you on the next one.